there was some struggles creatively in season 1. I remember when it was, I don't know how else to say it. The Enterprise was firing on all cylinders, cast-wise and production-wise. I think if there was a weakness, it was the scripts.
Because we were designing a show that had an entirely different look to it, both the interior and the exterior of the new Enterprise, and the costumes, and there was so much that I had to deal with on the production side that assembling a writing team was primarily Brannon's job. I mean, he didn't hire anybody who he didn't introduce me to, and he didn't have come meet me. I don't recall saying no to anybody, but it was Brannon who basically put together the writing staff.
I think at that point I had a little crisis of confidence, about no one would really want to work on this show. I mean, sometimes when you're doing a show, you think your show's not really a show, but everyone else's show's really a show. It's hard to describe. We were coming out of the mentality of we were a syndicated science fiction show, and we weren't on a network. And when we were on a network, it was a fledgling network at the time. So we just never really got a lot of respect. And there are writers, I guarantee you, there are big screenwriters out there whose dream it would be to write a Star Trek movie. But I didn't have that mentality when I was working on Star Trek. I didn't fully appreciate it. And I don't think I was ambitious enough in seeking out, writers. I just assumed no one really wanted to work on the show. And that's not to say I didn't find wonderful writers. The writers who had worked on Star Trek had all moved on to other things. Ron, Moore, gone. The people I knew and trusted had moved on. Now, I would end up writing many episodes with Rick. I hired a whole new staff. I had Andre Bormanis and Mike Sussman. Those were two guys I knew and trusted, but everyone else was new, and most of them didn't survive. Out of the 10 writers I hired in season 1, none of them lasted.
We were wrapping up Voyager after 7 years, and it was actually my first year working on a Star Trek show as a regular writer. And I got a call to go into Brannon's office. And Brannon took me aside and took Phyllis aside and said, we're doing a Star Trek prequel. It's called Enterprise. And I want you and Phyllis to be the first writers that I'm hiring. And so we were elated. I was given a top secret copy of the script that Rick and Brannon had been working on for a year. Went off on vacation and came back with a brand new group of writers and started working on season 1.
The entire crew and writing staff were completely gassed. They were all exhausted. We should have not gone on in the fall. They should have all gone away, gone to Hawaii, taken 3 months off, but we had to launch. We were a tentpole over there. If everybody could have gone away for a while and then come back, our first year and a half would have been different also. But it was just, the machine was going, as I said, and they sucked it up, and they got excited about our show. To their credit, I mean, they were shooting 26 episodes or however many they shot of the last season of Voyager. It might have been more, and they had 2 weeks off, I think, and then we were right back on it again.
Star Trek is hard to write. It's this weird period piece. It has a certain voice. You got to know science. You got to know the world of Star Trek, and be a halfway decent writer on top of that. It's this very specific thing. It wasn't easy for a lot of writers to get, and the same could be true of any show. I don't think I could write CSI. It's just not my cup. I wouldn't get it. I'm a halfway decent writer, but I would bomb at a lot of shows that just aren't. I probably wouldn't get.
I think Rick and Brannon had really wanted to hire people who had more of a character-y background to work on Enterprise than the science fiction background, which I think may have been predominant. But a lot of it was hit and miss. A lot of the people who we hired didn't really know about the Star Trek legacy and the lore, and that particularly became an issue. I mean, at that point, there had already been, 500 episodes of all the various series. And if you're pitching an idea that's been done, if you're not familiar with the canon, just the history of the show, it's really hard to get up to speed. So a lot of those writers who weren't as familiar with Star Trek kind of fell by the wayside.
And I was harsh on writers. You know, I had needs. This was a new show. There was a lot at stake. I didn't have time to give notes, hardly, on scripts. You know, we did 26 episodes. It's a lot of episodes. There were certain writers that just didn't get it at all. And then there were writers I liked, like the Jacques Matans, who Rick didn't like. It was the first time Rick and I really had a big blowout, because I thought they were great and he didn't. But I knew if they stayed around, you know, at the end of the day, you got to go through Rick's notes. I didn't think it would be a pleasant experience for them. They would go on to win multiple Emmys on Mad Men. So I was proven right. I think I probably rewrote every single episode on season 1. And I don't say that as with a badge of honor, because some of the episodes did not work at all, and I didn't want to. I just felt like I had to. And it's not uncommon for a first season, but it was tiring. I'm trying to find the voice of the show, first of all. You know, I mean, you have the best of intentions when you write a pilot. Your actors give you a lot of the voice, but now you're trying to find what the storytelling is. And we were very quickly falling into the trap of telling stories that could be told on Voyager. My thing was, is this a story that could only be told on Enterprise? And if it's not, we should find another story. And unfortunately, there were a lot of episodes that could have been told on any Star Trek. And that was the biggest problem with the show, was that oftentimes you felt like you were just watching same stories, different crew. And largely that was a product of having to make 26 episodes in a ridiculous amount of time. It's why cable, I think the shows you're seeing coming out of the cable world, it's not that they don't have their pressures, but they have a lot more time to get it right. There were more successful episodes that first year than maybe other Star Trek series had in their first year. And I would hope so, given the fact that it was the fifth incarnation. But there's no excuse for there being episodes that were mediocre, and that blame falls on my shoulders, not even Rick's, because I was the head writer. It was from no lack of effort, but I don't think I just didn't quite. I don't think I put together the writing staff that I needed. Me and the writers that were working could only do so much. It was, it's a lot of. Making a Star Trek episode is like a sacred thing. It takes a lot of work and a lot of ingredients, and for a Star Trek episode to work like Dear Doctor, it's got to have a conceptual hook that's fresh. It's got to have some sort of moral spine, something that engages all the characters, and most of the characters in some interesting way. And if you look at that one, everyone's got a moment. That's hard to do every 10 days.
Well, what are you suggesting? We choose one species over the other? All I'm saying is that we let nature make the choice.
The hell with nature. You're a doctor. You have a moral obligation to help people who are suffering.
I'm also a scientist, and I'm obligated to consider the larger issues.
The first year for me was really kind of a fog. I mean, the safest place for me to be was actually on set. The place where I felt most comfortable, because everything else was happening in a way I didn't really expect. It's hard to explain that, but I didn't really expect it to be what it was, though I knew that's what happened to people when they got something like that. Episode number 3 was unexpected. So out of the gate, there was a lot for me to do. And in unexpected, wind up being pregnant. And I really took that episode and tried to make it my own, because it was really centered around Trip and that whole experience. And it was funny, and I even had some ideas that I threw out that they were like, yeah, it's great. I think they were kind of giving me enough rope to hang myself with, and I didn't. And I think from that point forward, they were really able to hear my voice coming out of Trip. They were able to hear Trip's voice. And I think for writers, that's really what they're looking for, is they want to hear the voice. So therefore the story comes easier. They can hear you saying it. And in my case, I think that they were able to. So I was fortunate they kept coming back to me.
In the old days, astronauts rode rockets with millions of liters of hydrogen burning under their seats. You think they said, Gee, I'd love to go to the moon today, but it seems a little risky. I think if you asked anyone on board whether they thought this mission was worth the risk, you'd get the same answer from every one of them.
I made a decision quite early on in the telling of Malcolm that I wasn't going to stick to this 3-line bio that they'd just written for me. It was going to get pretty dull and tawdry early on, and I took a breath and went, you know what, I'm going to let a bit of Dominic out here. Let Malcolm, let him have a sense of humor. Let him have an attitude.
You better hope we don't make it, because if we survive, the first thing I'm gonna do is bust your ass back to crewman second class for insubordination.
Be my guest. I can use a little less responsibility. Now, get down here.
They let me out on the leash a bit because I was the British guy. You know, I could, because they were sticklers for the words. I remember shooting one scene early on that I had quite a lot of dialogue in, and get into the end of the take and think, nailed that. And then Jan, the script supervisor, came over and said, so Dominic, you said and instead of of, you said but instead of if, you said, I mean, you kidding? And she went, no, not on this show. And it became very apparent quite quickly that, you know, say what they wrote with every comma and full stop in place. But having said that, because I was the British guy, I got full reign to, you know, I'd just ring up and go, British guy wouldn't say that. Wouldn't say that. But he would say this. It had to get past Brannon or Rick. They were the holy grail of the words. You know, I was never too surprised by what they wrote for me. And I probably would have done. But like I say, I mean, I understood the dynamic early enough that they had a 3-pronged attack with these 3 characters. And I was, to be honest, I was just really grateful for you know, elbowing out my little place in this. And, you know, and I quite unawares, I became the action man on the show, and I was not expecting that. The captain would screw up again, and good old Malcolm would come in with his boys and save the day, and I enjoyed it very much, you know. We were just about to air. I don't think we'd even aired. I'm standing in line in the supermarket, and they're by the checkout with the TV guides, and there I was, on the TV guide in the uni. So I picked it off the shelf, and I was like, you know, can anyone sort of see that? And I'm flicking through, and it says, Dominic Keating, British actor, will be joining the cast, playing Malcolm Reed, reportedly. Turn to page 57. The first gay character in Star Trek? I tell ya, nearly dropped my sushi. I got home, I rang Brannon. I went, Brannon. He says, hi, Dominic. I said, listen, mate, I just read the TV guide. Apparently, you want to make Malcolm a gay character in space? And there was a pause, and he went, uh-huh. I went, okay. You know, and I'd played a couple of gay characters in my career up until then, not quite on such a large arena. And I think he must have sniffed because he said to me, he said, yeah, the publicity's going to be amazing. And he just went, so you're going to be on the front cover of The Advocate in October? And I'm like, the what? He goes, you don't know The Advocate? I went, no, I don't know. What is The Advocate? He goes, it's the largest gay publication in the world. I'm like, okay. And he goes, yeah, there's a whole lot of press we got lined up for you. And he could hear me just going, okay, mate, okay. And then he just stopped and went, don't be ridiculous. And then I can't repeat what he said next.
So in Brannon's office, we had these whiteboards on 3 out of the 4 walls that showed us when every episode for that season was going to start shooting. So we knew, for example, in July, that on November 17th, we had to start shooting episode 15. We had to have that script ready by that date. So we knew that right at the beginning of the season. And when you go into that room at the beginning of the season and you look at that whiteboard and you see all the 24 episodes and we got to have 24 scripts done, each by a particular date, it's pretty intimidating. But it's not so much the scripts as it is the stories. It's coming up with 24 original new stories, making sure that we're not repeating something that we did in the 400 and some odd previous episodes of Star Trek. That's a tremendous amount of stories that have already been told.
Finding those stories that could really only be done on that series that would be particular to us and that crew and that ship. That's what I think we were all looking for, particularly in the first year.
When you miss a day of production, if you're late with a script and you have to shut down for a day, that costs the studio money. You don't want to do that. That's a bad thing. Every day you're shut down, it's $100,000 some odd dollars that you've lost. That comes out of your budget, and your budget is fixed for the year.
You may get a script a week ahead of time. You may get it 2 days before you start. Sometimes you had a script long enough ahead of time to read it and then make a phone call and say, hey, this is great, or what, I don't understand this section, or you might have a conversation with the guy who wrote it as opposed to Rick and Brandon. So that varied all the time. And that's our television world is insane because everybody, it's not just the actors. I mean, when we show up to work, everybody else has already done their work and they're on to, they're 4 scenes down the road or 4 days down the road or 4 weeks down the road because they're having to build the set that's coming that they don't even know what they're going to use it for yet. Somebody start building that set and we'll give you the pages later. Something people don't really understand is the complexity of sculpting and laying out a bunch of shows and a season with a budget, with some, foresight. And some people are good at it and some people aren't.
Unless you're completely in a bubble or so well protected that it's going on without you knowing it, you feel the mayhem. It's also well known that the first year of any show is the toughest exponentially. You are trying to figure out what the show is about, what it can be about, who the characters are, how can you stretch them, and this is just on the page. It can be daunting just to think about how much of a marathon you're going to be running.
God bless the cast and the crew. They made some of these mediocre scripts look great. And every single one of them, we were going after something.
If these are the descendants of the original colonists, they'd never seen other humans before. Maybe we looked as strange to them as they did to us.
Episodes like Terra Nova, strangely enough, which was terrible. It was just terrible.
It's your turn to trust me.
Not a bad concept, but not good. Not a good episode. The Ferengi, there's no excuse for the Ferengi. No excuse. That was an act of desperation. I hated it. Oasis, terrible episode. Detained, 2 days and 2 nights. Who cares? It was a fucking bore, fortunate son. The idea that Travis is a space boomer is a cool idea, and there's a whole culture of space boomers, people born in space that have never been to Earth, is an interesting idea. It was badly executed.
We were on our own journey. We were on our own set of explorations, and we had to see how things fall. A lot of experimentation, a lot of failure, a lot of revamping, and a lot of second guessing sometimes.
I never really liked the excuse that, the show takes a couple years, like Next Generation took a couple years. Okay, fine. That was the first Star Trek series in a long time.
One of the advantages we had on the Star Trek series was that it was such an established entity that we were pretty much left on our own, to come up with what we were going to come up with. The only changes in direction or notes and responses, and a lot of notes and a lot of good notes, came from our executive producers, Brandon and Rick.
By mid-season, we started getting into, Shuttle Pod 1 was good. I thought Fusion was good. And Shockwave was pretty good. That turned out good. I love the idea that there's a crew member that was embedded there. That's very spy kind of stuff. I thought it turned out great. And I love the visuals. I think Archer was in this weird holographic thing when the guy was explaining the Temple Cold War, and I thought it came at around the right time, and I'm like, okay, this Temple Cold War thing's working. Silent Enemy, I thought, was kind of a good episode. I really felt the crew facing some unknown thing that was kind of scary, and I thought Dear Doctor was by far the best episode of the season, and it was very specific to Enterprise. I love the idea of a doctor exchange program, and it dealt with the real issue. It had it all. It was charming, it was funny, it was well-paced, it had a good framing device, and it ended up being dealing with a really good issue you'd never seen dealt with before. That's Star Trek at its best.
It would go against all my principles if I didn't ask you to reconsider what...
I have reconsidered. I spent the whole night reconsidering. And what I've decided goes against all my principles.
The studio made us change the ending. Phlox originally goes against the captain's orders, I think, is how we wrote it originally. But the studio didn't like that.
Someday, my people are going to come up with some sort of a doctrine. Something that tells us what we can and can't do out here. Should and shouldn't do. But until somebody tells me that they've drafted that directive, I'm going to have to remind myself every day that we didn't come out here to play God.
And the show did very well at the beginning. We were on the cover of Entertainment Weekly. It was a success. 7.0. Do you know how big that is by today's standards? And we dropped by the end of the year to a 3.3. So we lost half our viewers. By today's standards, 3.3 is still good. But we started strong.
The fact that the ratings fell off was something that you take very personally. And there are a lot of possible answers for why it was happening. UPN was changing dramatically. They were not focused on doing shows like a Star Trek show, like Enterprise specifically. There's also the whole question of some degree of what somebody called franchise fatigue. There was just so much Star Trek. Everything was in reruns at that point, and the numbers fell off, and it was very dejecting. A good half of our first month's audience had bailed.
And by the way, Enterprise did a lot of ambitious things. I was always trying to push the limits of what we could do. I really wanted the production values on this to be as cutting edge as they could be. Can we pull off people walking on a comet?
I did a whole 10 days in that suit, man, on that comet. God bless Anthony. He's a force of nature, and he'd take one big breath in the morning and just not shut up. And those suits were all wired so that we would listen and talk to each other. It was the real deal, and you couldn't turn it off unless you took the whole helmet bit off, and it was a big to-do, take the backpack off, and then you had to get it back on. So you'd spend, rather than go through that whole process, you'd just sit in a corner quietly. But Anthony, not him, no, he's running around the sets, he's in makeup, he's yakking to everyone. And there'd just come a point in the day on that particular episode when I'd just go, Anthony! Shut up, mate! You could hear, oh, Tommy, I'm sorry, man. Sorry, dude. Hard work, mate, in that EV suit, pretending to be weightless. With that helmet was 17 pounds alone. I remember saying to Scott Bakula one time when we were in those EV suits, and I just cried out in sweat. Oh, God, I just put me in a suit in a good legal show. And Scott looked at me and went, don't be ridiculous, Dami. Wouldn't be half as much fun. And he was right, look at what we got to do. Sometime towards the end of that first season, I did the convention circuit, and I was telling the story I told you earlier about getting the job. And I caught myself halfway through and went, God, it's just so strange telling this story again, a year on from shooting this first episode and getting the job. And there was this lady cried out from the back. She went, try saying that in 26 years, honey. There was a moment of like, oh my goodness. And here we are, 12, 13 years on, and still telling the stories, huh?
If there's a sad part about Star Trek is that in the awards world, short of the technical stuff, some of the music possibilities, writing, the acting, the directing, ho-hum, But if you know anything about it and you understand what's being done and how it's being done, it's just great, great creative people, enthusiastic, embraced the new cast, and we walked into this well-polished, oiled machine.
We've got won an Emmy for the pilot. I remember having to work the next day and walking into the set, and it was old hat to a lot of the people, the powers that be at Paramount, oh, it's just the technical guys always get it. We don't get it for this and that. But the people that you work with, they know. And it was kind of nice the day after to walk into the set and talk to everybody. It's good. It's good to win, bad to lose. I know you hear otherwise. Trust me on that. Anyway, I'm on the set getting ready to cover whatever the shot was that morning. And I get one of the ADs call, said, there's a phone call. I never got phone calls on the set. And I went over to the phone and I pick it up, and it was Scott Bakula. Now, Scott was in New York. I think he was ready to go on to a show and was holding it up. And he called and just to thank us, say that was good, congratulations, all of this. Be sure to spread it to everyone. It was the nicest thing. I'll never forget that. Enterprise was a treat. The cast was fabulous. Scott was a saint. Just real joy of all of the shows. And we had good people on all of them.
Yeah, toward the end of the season, once you've got that final script in prep, and you know that that's going to shoot, and then that will be the end of your production season, tremendous sense of relief, of course.
I did my best, and I think the show got better as it went, but I wish they'd all been Dear Doctors that first season. And by the end of the year, I was pretty dejected. I mean, Shockwave turned out good, but heading into season 2, I was tired and dejected and looking to do something better.